My stepbrothers tried to destroy my mother and me. They never expected what happened next. My name is Evan Mercer, and I'm 25 years old. Most people who meet me now think I got lucky. They see the company, the building, the quiet money behind it, and they assume I must have had someone backing me. They're wrong. Nobody backed me. For most of my life, the people living under the same roof with me thought I was the weakest person in the family. They thought I was the computer nerd, the pizza kid, the quiet boy who took insults because he didn't know how to fight back. But here's the thing about quiet people. Sometimes we aren't afraid. Sometimes we're just listening. My mother married Rick Harlan when I was 14. Rick owned Harlan Motors, one of the biggest car dealerships in our county. It wasn't some little corner lot with 5 used cars and a flapping banner. It was a real dealership. Bright lights, glass offices, service bays, finance desks, a huge sign out front, and rows of polished cars that looked like they had been arranged for a magazine cover. Rick was proud of that place. He had built it from almost nothing, and he never let anyone forget it. My mother, Linda, loved him. I still believe that. She wasn't looking for money. She had worked hard my whole life, and when Rick came along, she saw a man who was strong, successful, and sure of himself. Rick wasn't exactly warm to me, but he wasn't cruel either, at least not in the beginning. He didn't understand me. I was the kid with computer parts on my desk. Old towers opened up on the floor, cables everywhere, and computer magazines stacked beside my bed. I spent more time in computer club than on any sports field. Rick used to shake his head and say, "I don't know what you're doing with all those machines, kid." But then his office network would crash, or the sales printers would stop working, or one of the finance computers would get loaded with viruses. And suddenly, I wasn't useless anymore. He'd call me down to the dealership and say, "Can you fix this?" Most of the time, I could, so Rick tolerated me. His sons didn't. Brandon and Derek were everything I wasn't. Tall, loud, athletic, popular. They played football, basketball, baseball. Whatever season it was, they were the stars of it. They drove cars from their dad's dealership to school like they were movie stars. One week it was a black Mustang. The next it was a lifted truck. Then a shiny sports coupe with dealer plates. They didn't own any of them, but that didn't matter. At 16, image is everything. And Brandon and Derek had plenty of image. I had a pizza uniform, a bicycle before I saved enough for a used car, and a reputation as the kid who could recover your lost homework if your hard drive crashed. They called me keyboard boy, sometimes pizza geek, sometimes worse. They never hit me. That would have been too obvious. They just made sure I knew I didn't belong. My mother noticed some of it. Not all of it. I made sure of that. She was happy with Rick, or at least trying to be, and I didn't want to be the reason her new marriage turned into a battlefield. So I kept my head down. I went to school. I worked at the pizza place. I fixed computers. And late at night, I read tech forums. That's where everything changed. It was 2010, and Bitcoin was still something most people had never heard of. Even the people who had heard of it mostly thought it was a joke. Internet money, magic coins. A toy for programmers who had too much time and not enough social life. To me, it was fascinating. Not because I knew it would make me rich. I didn't. Nobody really knew that. I just liked the idea. A currency that didn't belong to a bank. A system that lived on computers. A new kind of money that sounded like science fiction, except people were actually using it. Then one night, I saw a post from a guy who wanted pizza. 3 extra large pizzas. 1 pepperoni, 1 pineapple, 1 ham with onions and mushrooms. He was offering 12,000 Bitcoin, 4,000 per pizza. I stared at the screen for a long time. At the time, 12,000 Bitcoin sounded like a huge number, but it wasn't worth much. not in dollars. Not yet. I worked at a pizza place. I got an employee discount. I could make the order happen. So I messaged him. I asked, "How do you actually send me the bitcoins?" He asked if I had a wallet. I told him no. He walked me through it. Download the Bitcoin client. Let it create a wallet. Find the receiving address. Copy it. Send it to him. I did exactly what he said. Then he sent me 1 Bitcoin as a test. I remember sitting there in my room, watching that little transaction appear on my screen. It wasn't much, but it felt like I had just opened a door into the future. The next day, I made the order at work. 3 extra large pizzas. With my discount, they cost me less than they should have. I delivered them myself. The man was friendly, maybe a little excited, like we were both part of some private experiment nobody else would understand. After I got home, the rest of the Bitcoin arrived. 12,000 coins, minus the test coin already sent. I sat in my room staring at the wallet. I didn't shout. I didn't tell my mother. I definitely didn't tell Brandon or Derek. They would have laughed until they cried. So I backed up the wallet file, wrote down what I needed, hid copies where nobody would look, and went downstairs for dinner like nothing had happened. Derek was talking about baseball. Brandon was bragging about a truck Rick had let him drive. Rick was talking about sales numbers. My mother asked me how work went. I said, pretty good. That was all. 3 pizzas, 12,000 Bitcoin, and nobody in that house knew. The next few years went by the way years do when you're young and trying to escape. I graduated high school, I moved out, I worked my way through college, computer science, part-time jobs, cheap apartments, long nights, instant noodles, old laptops. I didn't spend the Bitcoin. I barely touched it. At first, I checked the price because it was fun. Then I checked because it was unbelievable. Then I stopped checking every day because watching that kind of money rise and fall could make a person crazy. By the time I was 24, even after Bitcoin had crashed from its highs, those 3 pizzas had turned into more money than Brandon and Derek could have imagined. Tens of millions. And still, nobody knew. Not even my mother. I didn't hide it from her because I didn't trust her. I hid it because money changes the air in a room. I wanted her to know I loved her before she ever knew what I had. By then, I had started building my own company. Cybersecurity, business systems, data protection. The kind of work nobody noticed until something went wrong. I lived quietly. I drove a normal car. I wore normal clothes. And when Rick got sick, I came home more often. Cancer took him slowly. That's the cruel way of it. It didn't knock him down all at once. It took pieces. First, the long days at the dealership, then the driving, then the meetings, then the stairs. Finally, Rick Harlan, the man who had once walked through his dealership like a king, was in a hospice bed at home, thin and tired, with my mother beside him. Linda never left him. She managed his medication. She changed sheets. She helped him drink water. She talked to doctors. She slept in a chair beside his bed when she was too afraid to go to her own room. Brandon and Derek were supposed to visit. They rarely did. They always had excuses. The dealership needed them. A customer was coming in. The finance office was backed up. There was a meeting. There was always something. But I started hearing things. So did Rick. Bills that didn't make sense. Missing deposits. Inventory reports that didn't match the lot. Vendors calling the house. Lenders asking for documents Rick didn't remember signing. At first, Rick blamed confusion. Then illness. Then bookkeeping mistakes. But Rick wasn't stupid. Sick, yes. Weak, yes. But not stupid. One afternoon, I stopped by with groceries for Mom and found Rick awake. His voice was rough, but his eyes were clear. He looked at me and said, "You still know computers?" I almost smiled. "Yes, sir." He nodded toward the little desk in the corner of the room. "My attorney's coming tomorrow. I want you here." The attorney's name was Arthur Bell. He had been Rick's lawyer for years. Quiet man, gray hair, careful eyes. The kind of man who didn't waste words because he charged by the hour and knew every word mattered. Rick asked Arthur to look into the dealership, quietly. Not through Brandon, not through Derek. Through the books, the lenders, the records, the signatures, the inventory. What Arthur found broke Rick's heart. His sons had been skimming from repair jobs, pocketing down payments, using company credit for gambling trips, hiding repossessions, borrowing against inventory, signing Rick's name, treating Harlan Motors like it already belonged to them. And the worse Rick got, the bolder they became. They thought their father was too sick to notice. They thought Linda was too tired to fight. They thought I was still the computer nerd who would stand in the corner and say nothing. Rick changed after that. Not loudly. He didn't have the strength for loud anymore. But something in him hardened. He had built Harlan Motors for his sons. That was the truth. For years he believed they would carry his name forward. But at the end of his life, the people who carried him were not Brandon and Derek. It was Linda. And sometimes me. So Rick made a plan. He mortgaged everything he could. The house, the dealership property, the service building, equipment, assets, anything with value, he pulled money against it. To Brandon and Derek, it would still look like an empire. The dealership sign would still be there. The offices would still be there. The cars would still shine under the lights. But underneath it all, the value had been drained out and protected for Linda. Arthur prepared the documents. Rick signed a new will. Arthur kept the fraud file, and then Rick died. I won't pretend I loved Rick like a father. I didn't. But I respected what he did at the end. He saw the truth before he left. That mattered. The funeral was polite. Brandon and Derek played grieving sons very well. They shook hands, accepted sympathy, talked about carrying on their father's legacy. Then, 3 days later, they told my mother she had 30 days to leave the house. 30 days! After she had spent months caring for their father while they robbed his business. That was the first time I almost lost my temper. Almost. Instead, I took Mom home with me. I told her, "You're safe. That's all that matters tonight." She cried in my guest room with the door half closed. And I called Arthur Bell. The next week, Brandon and Derek walked into Harlan Motors like they owned the world. For about 20 minutes, they probably believed they did. Then the first lender arrived. He carried a folder and didn't smile. Brandon tried to brush him off. "We're handling things now." The lender looked across the lot at the rows of cars and said, "Then you understand those vehicles are collateral." Derek laughed. "There are cars." "No," the lender said. "They're floor plan inventory. You sell them, the proceeds come to us first." Brandon's face changed. "All of them?" "All the ones that matter." Then came the bank. Then came vendors. Then came tax notices. Then came men who didn't wear suits and didn't care about probate, gambling debts, personal debts, money Brandon and Derek had borrowed because they thought the inheritance would make them untouchable. Except the inheritance had touched them first. They had inherited the business. They had also inherited the pressure, the debt, the defaults, and every ugly promise they had made in the dark. 2 weeks later, they came to me. Not my mother. Me. They still didn't know about the Bitcoin. Not really. They knew I had a business. They knew I was doing well. They probably imagined I had a few $100,000, maybe some investors. They came into my office wearing expensive watches and panic under their collars. Brandon tried to sound friendly. "Evan, we've had our differences." I said nothing. Derek leaned forward. "We need a short-term loan. Just to stabilize things." "A loan," I said. "Family helps family," Brandon said. That almost made me laugh. Instead, I opened the folder Arthur had prepared. They didn't recognize the company name at first. Mercer Holdings. They stared at it like it was a foreign language. Then I explained. I had purchased several of the notes tied to Harlan Motors. Not all at once, not recklessly. Quietly, through attorneys, through proper channels, from lenders who were happy to get bad debt off their books. Brandon blinked at me. You bought our debt? No, I said. I bought the right to collect it. Derek stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. You can't do that. Arthur, sitting beside me, finally spoke. He can. He did. That was when they understood. Not all of it, but enough. The computer nerd owned the paper. The pizza kid held the leash. I gave them one offer. I would settle the gambling debts that were dangerous enough to get someone hurt. I would keep Arthur's fraud file from going immediately to law enforcement. I would take legal control of the dealership, the land, the business name, and the remaining assets. They would sign away every claim against my mother. They would never contact her again. And they would leave. Not just town, the country. I didn't care where they went. Canada, Mexico, Europe, anywhere. But they were done circling my mother's life. Brandon called me every name he could think of. Derek threatened lawsuits. Arthur calmly added another folder to the table. Copies of signatures, loan documents, inventory fraud, misused company credit, records of payments to gambling operations. Arthur said, You can fight, but if you do, this goes to the district attorney, the lenders, and the tax authorities before the end of business today. Silence can be loud. That room went very loud. In the end, they signed. Not because they were sorry, because they were trapped. They had spent years thinking they were predators. They were just loud fish swimming toward a hook their father had baited before he died. I paid what I had agreed to pay. Not for them, for my mother, for peace, for finality. Harlan Motors closed 3 months later. People in town talked, of course. They always do. Some said the Suns ruined it. Some said Rick had hidden more debt than anyone knew. Some said I came out of nowhere and stole the business. I didn't bother correcting them. The land was good. The building was solid. The service bays were useful. The offices only needed renovation. A year later, the old Harlan Motors sign came down. My company's sign went up. No flashing lights, no salesman slogans. Just clean letters on the front of a building that had once been full of lies. My mother runs the front office now. Not because she has to, because she likes people, and people like her. She has her own house, her own money, her own peace. I told her about the Bitcoin eventually. She cried when she understood. Not because of the money, because I had carried that secret alone since I was 16. She asked me why I never told her. I said, because I wanted you to know you were safe before you knew I was rich. That was the truth. As for Brandon and Derek, I hear things now and then. Nothing good. But I don't chase news about them. They got what they wanted. They inherited their father's business. They just didn't understand that Rick had already removed the treasure and left them with the trap. My stepbrothers drove cars they didn't own. They spent money they didn't earn. They inherited debts they didn't read. And me? I kept a password. I kept my mouth shut. And when the time came, I kept my mother safe.